You might have noticed that Mr. Petrella is still wearing a military uniform. It's moved up a little bit, but it's here to remind us that the United States' journey as a militaristic superpower doesn't end with World War II. In fact, it expands in Chapter 25, the Cold War. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States has really kind of emerged as an international superpower. There is no country that has the strength of the United States with its nuclear weapons and its economic and industrial might. But the Soviet Union, Russia, that communist nation, still stands out there as a, an alternative to the American democratic and capitalist system. And they see the United States' expanding influence as a threat. Meanwhile, the United States sees the expanding influence of the Soviet Union and its communist ideology as a threat similar to what we had fought against the Nazi Germans. Even though at the time of World War II we had been allied with the Soviet Union, now we were once again enemies. However, with that said, the United States and the Soviet Union both wanted to avoid World War III. We had just been through World War II, and while we didn't like each other and wanted to prevent the expansion of the other country's influence, we didn't want to have another global conflict. Thus, the United States turned its strategy to what became known as containment. This idea of preventing the spread of Soviet influence throughout the globe. This led to all sorts of economic programs that you'll see in the Chapter 25 slideshow, an expansion of the United States military influence in the world, including our involvement in the Korean conflict starting in 1950. With that said, the Korean conflict taught the United States an important lesson, which was the cost of this containment doctrine, not only in men, with 40,000 Americans lost in Korea, but also economically. Thus, the United States turned to a policy of deterrence. What deterrence basically was this idea of massive nuclear retaliation against anything we saw as Soviet aggression. The Soviets countered with the same basic mentality, thus leading to a nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. This escalated what would become a culture of uniformity and paranoia in the United States as we grew increasingly concerned not only about the possibility of a nuclear attack at the hands of the Soviet Union, but of communist spies infiltrating the United States and trying to tear it down from within. All of this is covered in the Chapter 25 slideshow and develops the United States into a new cultural identity, one that on the one hand creates security, on the other hand really undermines a lot of what we had seen as American virtues of understanding the importance of diversity and this concern over security compared to freedom. With that said, don't forget as you look over the Chapter 25 notes that you've got a supplemental exercise again, looking at this nuclear threat and what it did to the American cultural identity. And there's also all the other stuff on the checklist, including the quiz and the discussion groups, which aren't due until next week, but you really need to start getting a start on. But there's also this other thing coming up in a couple weeks you need to remember, and that's, of course, our second essay. Don't forget to start looking at it. The second essay asks you to kind of consider this concept of the importance of the presidency. In the beginning of our class, you may have noticed the executive branch did not seem to have as much influence, but by this point in our class, all the way to today, we really look at the president as the leader of our nation. And as the United States becomes an increasing global influence, the leader of what we call the free world. So what this essay asks you to think about is those traits that you think are really important to have in this leader, in this president, and to identify in history, specifically in our class, presidents, or in particular a president who best exemplifies those traits of what you see as a person who would make the best leader of the United States. Another way to put this, what are the traits that you're looking for when you go ahead and vote for a new president in the United States in another 4 years? Because we just did it this year. What were the traits that you think are important in making a good president?